Okay, so we only have an hour. Thank you, everybody who is joining us today. Spencer and I are really excited to do this. We've had a huge response. I was expecting maybe 30 or 40 people, but we've almost got 95. So it's a hot topic right now, and you business owners are stressed out and confused, and hopefully we can relieve some of your confusion. We may add to it though. As attorneys, sometimes we add to confusion, but as we get more people joining in, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping things. I'm in charge of technology, so it's an attorney doing tech today. If there is an issue, I apologize up front. We're doing the best we can. We'll work out the kinks for next time. We are going to do this again on Friday. Hopefully we'll get some more guidance coming from the Department of Labor, where we'll have more to talk about, and maybe we'll invite a CPA to join us on Friday. And hopefully this will go smoother. But one big overarching disclaimer we've got to get out of the way is we are both attorneys and we love to give advice. That's just the way our lives are. But we do need to disclaim that this webinar is not creating an attorney-client relationship with you. We are simply discussing hypotheticals that you guys are experiencing and hopefully explaining, helping you navigate through those to understand it and hopefully help you. If you have specific situations, please contact either one of us or another attorney that can help you directly with your particular situation, because every business is different from the business next door, and you guys, you really do have different situations going on. Okay, the other thing I want to make sure you all are aware is the law is changing by the minute, by the hour. There could be something coming down right now while we're doing this webinar. So we may not have time to answer all the questions. We may have to respond with, it depends, and we may need to so we're having chats come in, but we may need some more clarification for a lot of things. So hopefully you'll get some stuff today, but there could be more clarification coming down the road. And once we are done, this is going to be recorded. You are all muted, just so you know. This is a webinar. Spencer and I are the only ones who are not muted. If you have questions as we're talking, we want to cover what's been sent in to all of us ahead of time, and then we'll start going through your questions. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A. You can submit questions. Everyone should be able to see the questions that are submitted. And we will share the recording of this webinar. We'll send you a follow-up email, share it with you, include some links of some things that we talked about today to help you, and then you'll know, if you need to get back on with us on Friday. So my name is Dana Ball. I'm a small business attorney here in the state of Utah, and I help small business owners. I'm mainly working with business owners who have less than 50 employees, and I provide HR guidance on your employer obligations, as well as contracts and entity formation and selling and buying businesses. So Spencer Phillips, go ahead and introduce yourself and let's get going. We are 3 minutes in, we're doing good.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you who don't know me, Spencer Phillips, I'm the owner of Employer Lawyer, which is a small law firm. We just do HR consulting and litigation. And I was just really honored when Dana reached out to me earlier this week, because she and I do a lot, we serve a lot of the same community. And we felt by combining our client bases together and our knowledge together that we could offer this free service to help a lot of you to get answers to your important questions about this new law and what it means. And I think this is just going to be a fantastic experience to be together. So I'm excited to be a part of this.
Great. So we're going to give you guys a little bit of an overview of the law that has come down and start there. So Spencer, do you want to?
For sure. So we're going to start really high level, and then we're going to quickly drop down to answering specific questions that have been coming in from each of you and from other clients who may not be able to be a part of the conference this afternoon. So the primary thing I want everyone to know from a high level overview is that last week, Wednesday night, President Trump signed a new law called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. There's a lot, I printed it out, it's 50 pages long, there's a lot to it. We're going to be focusing on the employment provisions, tax provisions, and some other things that we think are really important to you guys as small business owners. The first part that I want to just address a little bit more in detail are the two different kinds of paid benefits that are now required by businesses to give to certain employees in certain circumstances. So those two different kinds of paid benefits are first Emergency Family Medical Leave Act, or Emergency FMLA. The second is Emergency Paid Sick Leave, so paid sick leave. The FMLA used to apply just to businesses with more than 50 employees. Now this new law, the way it's been written, it applies to every business with under 500 employees. So my guess is pretty much everyone who is a part of this conference call today, if you've got fewer than 500 employees, these two new leave laws now apply to you, and they continue to the end of the year. December 31st is the cutoff date. Now, before I dive into just a little bit of the specifics about what those two kinds of leave laws actually say, I want you to know that they don't actually kick in until April 2nd. So we've got a few more days before the law actually takes effect. And then the Department of Labor has said that they're going to give a 30-day window, sort of like a grace period, as people are trying to get into compliance with these new requirements, that the DOL will not be taking any enforcement actions. So we've got a little bit of a window here to understand what it means to ask questions, get those questions answered, and make sure all of you understand how to move forward in compliance. So the FMLA, or the emergency FMLA, essentially means that any employee who cannot work, and that means they can't work in person or they can't work remotely, they have a right to 2 weeks of unpaid leave and then 10 weeks of paid leave at 2/3 of their regular wage rate. And we can talk later about, how do you figure out what that is, but essentially they get 2 weeks off, job protection, no pay, and they get 10 weeks after that of 2/3 pay. Now the paid sick leave, which is the other part of this new law, is 2 weeks of pay at the employee's full rate of pay, which essentially can be used as those first 2 weeks of FMLA leave. Now it is capped at 80 hours, so it's basically 2 business weeks or 2 full weeks of 40-hour weeks at their full rate of pay. Now, some employees may earn more than $511 per day. If that's the case, if they're a higher paid employee, their wages are going to be capped right at the $511 level. Nobody can get more than that as part of the paid sick leave. And that only kicks in for employees who are unable to work remotely or in person because of a government-ordered quarantine, a medical-ordered quarantine, or because they themselves are experiencing some of the symptoms of COVID-19. On the other hand, if an employee is home and can't work because they're taking care of a child or other guidance which can be coming later from the Department of Labor, but we don't have it yet, their pay is capped at $200 per day instead of $511 per day. So that is like a maybe 3 or 4 minute summary of this new 50-something page law as far as the employment provisions go. But I want to turn it back over to Dana to talk a little bit more about the tax implications, and then we'll, anything else she's able to share with her insight, and then we can look into getting some of your questions answered.
Okay, thanks, Spencer. So just so you guys know, I believe if you want to ask a question, there is a way for you to raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask a question. So we have a little bit of a dialogue. We've already got one question coming in on the Q&A, so we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, so I've had a lot of questions on whether if tax credits will apply if you offer your employees today emergency paid leave, and the answer is no. So it's only paid leave under the act that happens beginning April 2nd and December 31st of this year. So if you are already paying employees FMLA or sick leave, you cannot claim that for a tax credit. That's all on you. And that's nice of you to do, but just know that you're doing that on your own and there is no tax credit available. Okay, so the tax credits for employers, this is how we understand it will work. And again, we're waiting for some more clarification. The Department of Labor is having an online dialogue tomorrow. I will send the link out for that. I will participate, so I will also be posting on social media and other avenues if there's anything of interest that we need to remember from it. But essentially, if you're So they chose April 1st for a reason. That is the beginning of the second quarter of this year. So we are in the last week of the first quarter right now. So next quarter begins April 2nd. So come June 28th and thereabout, you will be filing your employer quarterly payroll taxes. So once you file those, I'm going to give a rough, really easy example. If you have paid employees this quarter, April 2nd through June 28th, either emergency FMLA or paid sick leave, then you can apply for the credit, the tax credit. And let's just say you paid out total for leave, the paid leave, or now it's clear from the DOL that you can include any insurance costs that you've paid those employees, covered for those employees as well. So you add all that up and you claim that the total amount you paid for this leave is $10,000, or let's say $15,000, it's $15,000. But let's say that your payroll taxes total only equal $10,000. So what happens? So what will happen is that whoever is doing your payroll taxes you'll get the credit for the $10,000 right there. That means that you will not be sending to the IRS for quarter two the $10,000 for payroll taxes. That will come back to you right there. But what about that other $5,000? So it's now clear that there will be a form that you can submit immediately and to the IRS, and they should process a refund check to you for that $5,000. Again, we don't know how soon that refund check will come. There's no promises made, but that's what's happening. Now, how do you cover the payroll taxes between now and getting the credit? That's, again, a question that we don't know. If you don't have the cash flow to do it, we don't know. Hopefully they're working on some sort of financial assistance to help small business owners be able to cover that. But right now we don't know. There is a way if you have less than 50 employees, and if it's going to be an undue hardship on your business to cover that paid leave, and this is only applicable to the emergency FMLA, this is not to sick leave, then you can apply to be exempted, to have to pay for emergency FMLA. So again, that's another form we're waiting to have available to us. Then we've also got questions on employers getting the tax credit. This is something, so if you're a 1099 or you're a self-employed individual, then there's some questions. You have to meet the same standards that the employees do in order to get the leave. So for emergency FMLA, you're taking the leave because you have to care for a child who is not at school. So it has to be under that for emergency FMLA. If it's paid sick leave, it's under one of those triggers. So if you're self-employed, it's our understanding that you will be able to get that credit, not with quarterly taxes. I'm sorry. I don't think that is what it's saying. I think you have to wait until you file your taxes next year for 2020. So that's a year from now in April of 2021. And it will be credited against your income level, and that you'll get the tax credit there. But if we get a CPA on here Friday, hopefully we'll have more clarification from the Department of Labor and can better give you some direction on that. So, okay, so we have 5 questions in our Q&A. So let's get started. Spencer, do you want me to read the one that we talked through? Here, I'll read this one.
Yeah, please do, and then we can.
Let you answer this one.
The answer.
This is a company that has 5 locations, 46 employees. They are all laid off currently. They are planning on reopening in 10 days, but when they reopen, they are going to have shorter hours and less staff. Some of the people that are currently laid off are not going to be coming back anytime soon. Are there any implications with bringing some of them back, but not others?
So that's a fantastic question, and I think it's really relevant probably for a lot of the people who are part of our call today. And Deanna, I just want to say, because this is such a new law, we haven't even had it a week yet, and we're still waiting for official guidance from the DOL about some of the trickier parts of how it's all going to work. Deanna, if you see things differently than I do, please jump in and share.
Oh, we will.
My thought is, my thought is a lot of businesses are having to lay off either all or a significant portion of their workforce. And they're doing it not because people are asking for time off and they're sick. They're doing it because there isn't the volume or the number of clients or customers coming in to support the employee staff that they're used to having. And so anytime a business is forced to lay people off because there just is not enough volume, there's not enough dollars flowing into the business, I don't see that as any kind of a legal risk to the business as far as there is a retaliation, discrimination kind of a provision in this new law that says or prohibits employers from discriminating against or retaliating against anyone who requests benefits under this new law. But if the reason employees are being let go is because there just isn't enough work, I don't see that as being a liability issue. And then specifically for that question, bringing some people back, but not everyone back, again, I don't see that as a risk issue. I think employers have the right to decide, which employees and when and how much, how many hours, who do we need for certain positions to sort of slowly start to ramp back up our workforce, depending on what the need is to keep the business running. So whether it's squeezing down and reducing the workforce or building it back up, I think that's something business owners are able to do without a risk that they're going to somehow be getting in trouble with this new law.
Okay, and I agree with you. We could cover. I know we've got some dentists and dental practices joining us today, and a lot of them have ceased operations, and I use that terminology because if you're in Utah, that's what triggers this flexible rules to seek for your employees to seek unemployment. So you haven't terminated an employee, you haven't laid them off, you are just ceasing operations right now. If you terminate, it's a final. You're issuing them their last, paycheck and paying out any accrued leave if you offered that. A layoff is expecting employees back, and with the Utah laws, you can go and they can get unemployment, but it's like a furlough, so ceasing operations, and that's a tough situation. So we can get into that if more of you have questions. The one thing you need to know is if you reopen and you start again operating like you did, or even at a minimal level, maybe you just start with 2 days a week, you're no longer ceasing operations for the employees that are now going to be scheduled to work. And so after April 2nd, between December 31st, you are under this paid sick and emergency FMLA. So you will be obligated if those certain things are triggered that the employees deserve that. So, okay, there was one other follow-up question. He says, currently we are keeping our management on the company health insurance policy. If for some reason we are unable to reopen in 10 days, we will have to cancel the company health insurance policy. Is there any implication with canceling health insurance during COVID-19?
So Dana, I don't think I've got a great answer for that question. I mean, what I would probably say in response is they need to work with their insurance broker and their insurance representative to understand what the terms and conditions are of the plan that they've signed up for. But I don't think, as long as they're complying with the rules about how long that plan can be, well, what terms or what events might cause that plan to be canceled, if they're simply complying with the plan terms and conditions, I don't see that as being raising any liability under this new COVID-19 law. But what are your thoughts?
There is no law in Utah, anyway, that I know that requires an employer to provide health insurance to an employer with less than 50 employees. So it's the employer's decision on whether they want to offer that or not. And so again, if you have insurance, health insurance, and you're in compliance with the agreement you have with that company and you decide you don't want to do it, that's your call.
One thing I would just mention, though, of course, in any these kinds of situations, that if an employer has an employee handbook that has made certain assurances to their employees about what benefits are available, make sure that this is an excellent time to be looking through that employee handbook and making changes based on the changing business environment that we're all operating in right now. I mean, handbooks are live documents. They're meant to be changed. And so if there are benefits in there that you're not able to continue providing to employees, now might be a good time to make those revisions and get that redistributed and make it available to the employees who are still coming into work for you.
Yes, I applaud that. It is definitely the time that needs to be happening as you change your policies. So, okay, here's another one. I am wondering what, if any, data collecting burdens should we be taking on immediately versus waiting for guidance as to what the stimulus reimbursement packages may look like. A partner organization said they were going to start asking employees to fill out time cards with the number of hours they worked versus paid for. So salaried employees, those being paid full wages regardless of hours worked right now. This feels like a heavy burden, especially for an office that struggles with time card compliance as is. So I'm going to answer this question. If you are an employer, and again, if you're not in the state of Utah, you need to check with an employment attorney in your state, because the state of Utah generally follows what the Department of Labor says, but you are required to keep accurate records of your employees' working hours. That's just, you will be opening the door to some serious investigation and possible fines if you cannot produce records of time clock. However you want to keep the records is up to you. They just have to be accurate. So again, documentation, business owners will always end up saving your butt with any issue or legal action. If you can pull out documentation to prove your version of the events, it's so much better. And I know it's a hassle. I'm sure keeping time records is not fun for some employees, especially if they are salaried. And Spencer, maybe you have more ideas on this, but a salaried employee may not have to keep their actual time records, but I still think it's a good idea. I think you could run into issues if there are certain provisions in the handbook that are specific to, you know, salaried employees, and what if they get paid the salary for, you know, extended leave periods of time or whatever. I just think it's a good idea to have those records anyway.
Yeah, I think I entirely agree with that, Dana. And so even if an employee is classified as a salaried employee, sometimes there are challenges to that classification. And the DOL oftentimes is very employee focused or looking for ways to help employees. So if they ever decided that an employee was actually hourly instead of a salaried exempt employee, you're going to want to have those records. But to Jessica's question, though, one of the things I think is really important to remember is that we expect to be getting a lot more guidance from the DOL this week. And so that's one of the reasons that we want to make sure we're bringing this information to each of you as quickly as we can. And I think we will get some guidance from them about any record keeping obligations. But to reiterate what Dana was saying, the more accurate and the more carefully businesses can collect information about hours worked, about benefits being paid, et cetera, it just puts the business in a better position and gives them protection. And so it's worth it despite the hassle.
So right now, we don't really know the answer to what documentation you need to have in order to prove that you actually paid leave according to the act. So there's no clarification on that yet. We're hoping that we get that. I'm assuming that if you are audited, then that's when they're going to look through your records to make sure that that leave applied to the act or not, if you deserve the tax credit or not. And if you don't have documentation to back up that your employee's school was closed, you may not get that tax credit. So act accordingly, and I would just put in a file whatever you can that can help prove that you deserve the tax credit. So, okay, let me start with this question. It's around the tax credit. So will this occur when, yes, we've answered this. It will occur for your quarterly taxes for employees, but not necessarily for employers. And then Spencer answered, if someone's wage is higher, will we need to pay that max wage? I am guessing the government will only reduce to the max in the current policy plan, correct? So if they're a high paid employee, they're only going to get the max amount for the time off for the paid
Exactly.
leave. So, okay, how about this one? How does this affect part-time and at-will employees who work special events, erratic schedules? Will these hours while these hours are often not regular week to week, they do have some guarantee of hours that allow hours to depend on a small paycheck that supplements their income. Whereas in the case of many of this person's employees, it gives them a small needed income around the demands of schooling.
That's a great question. I'll give the first shot at that, Dana. Is what I've been advising my clients to do is, especially for those who don't have regular hours or maybe whose hours have already been significantly reduced in the last couple of weeks, is to look at what their average hours were for the past 6 months. And that's really the standard I think that we should be looking at. I think it may actually be in some of the DOL guidance or maybe in this 50-some page law, but generally looking at 6 months' time to see how many hours was this person normally working, how much were they paid, and that gives you then the benchmark for the paid sick leave, which is at their full rate of pay for 2 weeks, or it helps you to figure out, well, what would be 2/3 of their pay if it's somebody who's asking for 10 weeks of pay under the emergency FMLA provision.
Okay, so I don't know about the average for 6 months. I haven't read that in particular, but I do think this raises an interesting question. So you as employers are under a lot of stress trying to figure out how much you're going to have to pay out and what you're obligated to do. But at the same time, I think it's important to note right now your employees are under a lot of stress as well. And I do believe how both sides treat the situation will reflect the future on how things go for your business, your company, your relationship with your employees. So a lot of times employees put you business owners up on a pedestal. You know, they're the rich business owner. They don't need to worry about finances, but here I am without a job and I'm not getting a paycheck. Some employees understand that you guys are under a lot of financial pressure as well, but some don't, most of them don't. And it's a question on what you want to do being a good business owner. So I think this is a good example. So maybe they are on an erratic work schedule. And I think if you have the cash flow to do it, looking at their 6 months and being a good person to give them some relief, if you are financially capable to do that, that would be good for you to do. So just practicing doing good things going forward. Okay, so should we, I have one more and then we'll get to the Q&A if you want to start looking at that, Spencer. There's 16 questions pending right now. Okay, this person owns a therapy office and he says, does the employee hours that require payment start from April 2nd onward? And we talked about that. Yes, it does. For this paid leave to get the tax credit, it has to be between April 2nd and the end of the year. Also, my employees' overall hours are being affected by stay-at-home concerns and may not be fully sustained by telehealth options. So being able to work from home is affecting this employee's situation. So they've gone down from 6 clinical hours to maybe 3 or 4 clinical hours per day. How does one deal with that? How about if an employee at the clinic is a 2-parent family, split the week staying home to care for a child? So this is an issue of intermittent leave as far as the splitting the child care, and that hasn't been addressed. So I don't have an answer. Do you, Spencer?
Yeah, I don't.
I don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, I don't have any clear guidance or answers on what would be expected in that kind of situation, but that's something we may be hearing about more this week, though. And so I would just, and there may be a number of questions we come through here that really haven't been addressed authoritatively from the government side. And so I would just encourage all of you who are participating to pay attention to emails from Dana and from Spencer or other sources where you've got information coming in, because this is something that's changing and developing literally day by day and sometimes hour by hour.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so let's hit the first Q&A question. It says, what, if anything, should we be aware of when terminating individuals when we initially furloughed them? Obviously, don't terminate a sick individual. Excellent, thumbs up. What else should we watch out for when terminating someone who was furloughed? Business as usual in terms of general best practices? Okay, my response here would be that definitely this law does not change anything as far as the general rule in Utah that all employees are employed at will. meaning that business owners can let them go for any reason, a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all. Business owners just can't fire people for illegal reasons. And under this new COVID-19 Relief Act, or this Coronavirus Response Act, I should say, there is clear language that terminating or otherwise disciplining or somehow treating somebody unfairly because they have asked for emergency FMLA or emergency paid sick leave would be a clear violation of this new law that would subject the business to liability under this new law. So I would encourage business owners to be really careful to recognize when somebody has asked for any kind of relief under this new law, if they are sick, if they're taking care of kids who are home and out of school because of the virus, or who have been ordered to quarantine by a government official or by a doctor. Any of those circumstances may very well give rise to rights under this new law. And if that's the case, we definitely don't want you guys letting those people go, because that would be an act of retaliation or unlawful treatment against them. But other than that, if the employee who is needing to be let go has not asked for any benefits under this new law, it is the same as usual, business as usual, employment at will. We can let them go for any reason as long as it's not an illegal reason.
And I would just add to that, if you have an employee that's requested to self-quarantine, maybe you are still open for business, you need to make sure that you're following workplace standards under OSHA, under the CDC, and anything that's been disseminated from the government regarding COVID-19. If they have a pre-existing health condition that could make them more susceptible to getting the virus, and they are asking to stay home and self-quarantine, I would be very careful, just like what we just talked about, and operate very cautiously with them, because they could be asking, it could fall under an ADA, a disability under the ADA, and they could be asking for an accommodation. So you just need to be very careful if that is the case. So just document. So documenting any conversation you have with employees regarding this will help you. So.
Fantastic. How about we'll do the second one here from an anonymous attendee. I own a commission-based business. I have 6 employees. We have suspended services this week. How does unemployment work for commission-based employees? So my initial response to that would be that how unemployment works is really up to the state. They are trying to be as generous as they can in approving unemployment insurance applications. The process is being streamlined. The eligibility requirements are being modified. And so regardless of whether your employees are commission-based or hourly or salaried, anyone who is not able to work or who has significantly reduced hours or is laid off temporarily, all of those people, in my mind, should be encouraged to go and apply for unemployment, and the state will make those determinations.
So if they're commission-based, I guess that leads me to think, well, are they a 1099? Is that how you're paying them through commissions? If they're not, and they really are an employee receiving on your payroll, and that the unemployment office will just look at their pay to determine what they should get as unemployment.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks, Dan. Did you want to read the next one?
Okay, so we have individuals who have children at home but wouldn't have otherwise felt the need to stay home with them, meaning they would have come to work anyway if their kids were at home. Are there any provisions on the need to be home with the children who have schools that are closed? Language is vague, and I assume they want it that way to apply to anyone with kids regardless of the need to be home. Actually, you have to be able to show that the employee, there is a need for that employee to be home taking care of them. So if you have if your spouse can fulfill that role, then, and you work from home, then, then that employee who can work from home has someone who can care for the kids, right? So there isn't a need for them to be home. They can still do work, is the issue. If they can't do work, I think is where you need to draw the line.
That's right. And as far as documenting that, I think it's going to come down to whether it's a communication between the employer and the employee, and whether or not the employer is willing to accept the employee's assertion that they cannot work. But Dana's point is really important, that none of these benefits apply unless the employee is unable to work remotely or in person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, figuring out when that person really cannot work or when they just don't want to work is a gray area that isn't really addressed in the law. I would probably encourage my business owner clients, if they can, is decide with the employee that if the employee says, listen, I just cannot work, and rather than challenging them on that, well, I think there's a way you could, and can't you have somebody else watch your kids? I would encourage business owners, if they're financially able to, just go with what the employee says. I think that's a safer place to be.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, here is one from Shelley. Are the covered insurance costs only covered if you send employees home? So you only you are only allowed the tax credit if the employees are actually taking leave under the emergency FMLA or the emergency paid sick leave. So if they're not sent home, they're still working, they don't fall under that, either one of those, to be able to get leave. So then no, the insurance would not be covered under the tax credit. They have to be getting the sick leave or the FMLA leave.
I think that's right. And the next two are also about taxes and refunds. You want to tackle these two, Dana?
Do we have access to that form? We do not have access to the refund check form yet, not that I know of. I didn't see one today, so who knows? But as soon as I see it, I will forward that out. Regarding the tax credit, if we're required to file our payroll taxes, well, then you'll have to check with who files your payroll taxes. If they do it monthly, you might be able to. It does say quarterly, so I'm not sure on that. You'll have to ask your CPA.
Okay, Rod has a great question here. So you're saying terminating or laying off an employee due to lack of work is not covered under this new law. Rod, that's my understanding. If you're letting somebody go or you're laying them people off because there just isn't enough work to support your employee workforce, that would not entitle the employee to any leave under the FMLA emergency or the emergency paid sick leave. Those two laws are only going to apply when the employee themselves is unable to work because of some of the circumstances that the law lays out. So businesses that are slowing down operations or are temporarily suspending operations, I don't believe that those employees would be eligible for the emergency FMLA, emergency paid sick leave, but they would, of course, be able to go to the state and apply for unemployment insurance benefits.
I think if you just keep in your head, if the employees are scheduled to work right now, then as of April 2nd, not right now, not today, as of April 2nd, you've got them in the schedule to work, then the emergency paid leave applies to you as an employer.
Okay, the next one, anonymous. What kind of documentation does the employee need to provide to the employer to show they cannot work? And our employees have the opportunity to work via telecommunications. So we've addressed this one primarily. There's no clear guidance in the law or from the Department of Labor about what kind of documentation is required. I do encourage business owners to give deference to the employees when they say that they cannot work. But in this question here, the attendee says that they have the ability to work via telecommunication or remotely. If that's the case, none of these benefits apply to them because they're still able to work.
Yeah. Okay, Neela, so reduction of force due to reduction of gross income. Okay, she's an accountant. So let's see what. No customer after April 1 will fall under, yes, it will fall under this new law after April 2nd. Actually, it just simply is no longer a general reduction of force at that point. If we are considering this to assist with business sustainability in the long term, I don't think that you necessarily, I know a lot of companies are acting quickly and laying off a ton of people right now before the law goes into effect. And maybe, Spencer, you have a different opinion, but I really feel like we've covered the fact that if there is a financial hardship going against the company, you can no longer have employees working because there is no business. If you're a restaurant that's been forced to close by the government, or maybe reduced hours, and so some of your people aren't working at all and getting a check, even after April 2nd, they do not qualify for the leave if they are not scheduled to work. So you could do a mass layoff after April 2nd if there's no business. If the business cannot sustain itself, there's no reason why you can't do a layoff.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Dana. And in fact, the guidance from the DOL, that, or at least the initial guidance that they shared last week on Friday, is that when they're planning on making it possible for smaller businesses to exempt themselves from the emergency FMLA, if compliance with that 2/3 pay for 10 weeks would potentially put their business at risk. So, the government is trying, as upset as I know a lot of my clients were initially when they heard about this new law, I think the government is trying to first of all, make it a little bit more manageable by saying, listen, there are tax credits that are available immediately based on, withholding money that you otherwise would have paid. And they're planning to make it an option to exempt a small business with 50 or fewer employees from having to comply with some of these rules if it would put their business in jeopardy to pay those benefits in the first place.
And again, they say, the reimbursement of the tax credit is immediate. We still have to deal with your cash flow between now and the end of the quarter and getting that tax credit. So hopefully we'll get some more, the Senate will provide some more financial relief to small business owners to be able to cover their current need for that added payroll costs in order to pay leave. The other issue that comes up with the emergency FMLA is if you're a small business owner and you are still in operation mode, and one of your or two of your employees need to take emergency FMLA, they qualify for it, but you can't run your business without those employees. So if you have less than 50 employees, that's when you would be, applying for that exemption.
Exactly. The next question, we have a necessary business, plumbing, where some of our employees are going in homes for repairs. Do we have any liability if they catch the virus? What about if they are doing maintenance versus necessary service? Now, just as a quick disclaimer, I don't do a lot of workers' compensation in my practice, but if an employee is outperforming the duties of the position and they do contract the virus and they become sick or essentially injured while they were in the course of carrying out their duties, I would expect that they would be covered under the workers' compensation insurance that every business is required to carry for all of their employees. Dana, any thoughts on that?
So this is the main issue that came up with for dental offices, is that their liability insurance. There has been, in Utah, there's been no government mandate for these dental offices to close, but a lot of them decided to close because their liability insurance carrier got back to them and said, you need to follow what the ADA and the CDC are saying, and you need to be closed, but you still need to be open for emergency care. So it's hard to answer that question.
It is tricky. Okay, let's tackle this next one. I'll take this one too, because then we've got another credit one coming up. In the mental health services industry, if workers' hours are reduced because they can't see clients personally, but they can see a reduced number of clients via telehealth, does that fall under FMLA or sick leave, or is that considered a reduction of hours that the employee can file unemployment for? Because that employee, and we're treating this as a hypothetical because this is not legal advice, that employee that's able to work even a reduced number of hours remotely or visiting clients by telehealth, they are still able to work, which means that they are not eligible for emergency FMLA or emergency sick leave. But because their hours have been reduced, they are eligible to apply for it. And my expectation is that they will probably get unemployment insurance from the state, depending on how severely their hours have been reduced.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the other one that we were just talking about. If you're in a business where you have employees who are still working and you're concerned about the liability issues, I have seen floating around the internet, and maybe Spencer and I need to create these waivers, but if you're providing emergency care to individuals, there are waivers that businesses are having their patients sign that are waiving the liability. They understand the risk of COVID-19, that they're putting themselves at risk to get it by having this emergency care being done. And then there's one for employees as well. And maybe if you have technicians going into homes, maybe you need to implement a waiver as well, just as an additional documentation that the homeowner was very aware and accepted the risk. And then same with your employees. So.
All right, you want to take the question from Rich?
You mentioned health insurance is eligible for a COVID credit. Is this also true if you reimburse through? That's a good question. I do not know the answer, and boy, that's a really good question. We'll have to see if they provide some guidance on that. And again, we may not get all the guidance we need by April 2nd. I really think that they gave us the 30-day buffer for their benefit too, because they need to work out these questions that are just not clear right now. So I will put that on my radar though. That is a really good question.
For sure. And so we do expect some clear guidance from the DOL and the IRS this week before the actual effective date of the new law kicks in. But again, I totally agree with Dana that I think they're buying themselves another month of time to figure out how on earth to make this new law manageable for businesses across the country. I mean, it's a huge change to the benefits that small businesses or businesses under 500 have been ever required to give their employees. And it's going to take a lot of work to figure out how do we actually put this thing into place and get it rolling.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, a question from Stacy. With hourly employees working from home, are we required to pay them the full hourly, or can we reduce it due to the workload also being reduced? Great question. As long as there's not a contract between the employer and the employee, the wages that are paid to an employee are always going to be, they can be adjusted upwards or downwards based on business needs. So if there was a contract signed with an employee where you're guaranteeing a certain number of hours or a certain level of pay for a certain period of time, then there's a risk of a breach of contract if the employer backs off on those promises. But most of the time, just the same way that we can increase salaries or wages when business is doing well, the business generally has the ability to lower those salaries or wages when the business is not doing well.
Yep. I agree. Okay.
All right, want to take the next one?
Also, if they only stay home, say 2 days per week to care for children versus a whole week, are we just paying them partially for that week? You have to pay employees for all hours worked. So if they're working from home, you have to pay them for those hours that they are working from home or at your place of business.
If that's right. And then I guess another way to read the question, if the time that they're spending at home, if they cannot work, say 2 days a week while they're taking care of kids, but they can come in the other 3 days, then those days when they're not able to work due to kids being out of school because of the COVID virus, that would be some of the time that they would be paid for under the emergency FMLA potentially.
And then you also need to consider if these employees are under salary, it may be different. So that's where you need to make sure they are being paid salary in accordance with, there aren't any issues with overtime exemptions and they qualify to be paid salary, then you may be required to pay them their full salary.
Exactly. And I think what Dan and I are both worried about is we don't want somebody to start docking pay for a salaried employee, a salaried exempt employee, because that can put their salaried exemption at risk. Yeah. And depending on how that turns out at the end of the day, it could mean that you then start to pay that person for all their overtime hours that they've been working because we lost the exemption for them. And so it's a bit deeper than what we need to talk about in this meeting, but just know that there is a risk anytime you start docking pay from salaried workers who work some of the week.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand what provision we're talking about. Do you, Spencer? How do we
let me read it out loud and see if we can figure this out. So how do we determine which provision an employee is covered under? Do we wait for them to declare? Do we need to survey our employees? We have 200 plus employees spread out in various locations. I think what the attendee is asking is, how do we know whether somebody's benefits are falling under the emergency FMLA or the emergency paid sick leave? And frankly, they can run concurrently because the first 2 weeks of emergency FMLA is unpaid. And so assuming that an employee doesn't have any paid time off from the business, they could, if they are staying home and cannot work because of a child who's out of school or unable to get formal daycare, they could take those first 2 weeks of unpaid FMLA and actually use their 2 weeks of full pay under the paid sick leave. So the first 2 weeks out of work could be at their full rate of pay up to $511 or up to $200, depending on the reason. Now, actually, it would be up to $200 per day because they'd be staying out of work to care for a child who can't go to school, which is item number 5 on the paid sick leave list. So that's capped at $200 a day for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, the next 10 weeks would be at 2/3 of their pay for the remainder of the emergency FMLA leave. So I don't know that it's necessary for an employee to declare that I need emergency FMLA or I need emergency paid sick. I think that's a discussion that needs to happen between the business owner and the employee to make sure we're all staying on the same page.
So employees just can't randomly decide to take leave. There has to be some sort of discussion between both the employee and employer to determine what's going on and then document that.
I think you're exactly right. Yep.
All right. How should we handle COVID compensation for commissioned salespeople? Well, again, it depends on you and if you're under a contract with the commissioned salespeople. We've talked about that. You do have obligations if you have signed a contract to pay them a certain amount for a certain period of time. If they are a 1099, I'm not going to call them a 1099 employee because they're not really an employee. If they're 1099, then it falls under them to be a sole proprietor if they're not set up as a legal entity themselves. So
yeah, I'll just kind of tack onto that, Dana, that one of the things I share with my clients is if you have a contract, for example, in this question with a commissioned salesperson, that contract is essentially like a little law that has been agreed and approved and voted on and passed between the employer and the employee. And so this new law that was passed last week, emergency FMLA, emergency paid sick, would not impact any of the promises or assurances that the employer and employee had given each other in that contract.
yeah.
So I would encourage Rich and all the rest of you to just make sure you're familiar with what the language is in the contracts that you've signed with your employees and make sure you're following those contracts so that you don't open yourself up to potential legal liability for breaching the contract.
And if you don't have an actual contract you've signed, then you fall back to your handbooks and your policies and procedures that are documented to determine if you're in breach. Okay, sorry, just joined. Did you already talk about us as self-employed owners and stuff to pay bills? And what about my awesome independent contractors that I have? Yes, we have gone over that. So we will send you the recording. Let's see.
And we've got a question here from Sandra. How do we get signed up for future answers to questions? We love that. We want all of you, if you're not already communicating with us by email or in connection with either Dana's office or my office, please reach out. We are here as a resource for you. We want to, we're learning this law as quickly as we can. And we want to make sure each of you understand what it means for your businesses so that you can move forward and not be worried that you might not be in compliance.
Yes, for sure. What are considered significantly reduced hours?
We don't have any guidance, do we yet?
Yeah.
No. But if that question is in relation to, and I don't know that that's all the question says, if you're thinking about unemployment insurance, anybody who has reduced hours of any kind is welcome to go and apply. The state has their own formula for figuring out who they're going to award benefits to and who they're not. But I would say any employee who is struggling because their hours have been cut is to encourage them to go and apply for unemployment, and then the state will decide if they're eligible or not.
Okay, so I'm going to take this one. My independent contractors are 1099s. I am self-employed as well. Can we still go apply for unemployment? We shut down last week. I think that you can. What the issue is going to be is how are you paying yourself and how are your 1099 independent contractors paying themselves? Are you simply doing an income draw, transferring money back and forth, or are you running your pay through payroll, cutting yourself an actual payroll check? Because maybe you know, Spencer, but I believe that unemployment is tied to actual payroll. So maybe if you're an S corp, then or you're an LLC being taxed like an S corp, you're required to run a certain percentage through payroll on yourself. Then I think unemployment would only go against that small percentage and not your complete financial picture of income growth plus payroll. So then it would be a reduced amount, but I think that you still could go file for unemployment.
I think you're absolutely right, Dana. That's a perfect answer. The next one, will there be a summary of the webinar sent to us by email? Dana, do you want to talk about the remote or the
Well, we'll do a recording. I have to I'll see if we can do a transcript. We may be able to. I'll check it out. So
Okay.
I'll let you know.
All right, we have a great question here from Jeff. What about staff that still work every day but only work 25 to 50% of their normal hours? Will we need to pay up to their 6-month norm? So Jeff, if you're referring to any employee who takes emergency FMLA and they have a right to 10 weeks of 2/3 pay, my understanding of the law right now, and this may change when we get more guidance from the DOL, is that you're going to look at what is their average pay before we started reducing hours because of this COVID pandemic. And whatever their normal rate of pay would be, they are eligible for 2/3 of that. Now, the DOL may come back and say anyone who's still working, you just pay them at 2/3 of their rate for the hours that they are working, but I don't know that that's the way they're going to come down on this.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. So we've done pretty good at getting through these questions. So thank you all for submitting them. I'm gonna tackle the next one. Do we know whether the FMLA expansion or the paid sick leave laws are retroactive? They are not retroactive. It starts April 2nd to December 31st of this year. So don't worry about having to go back and figure it out.
Okay, next one. You may have covered this already. What employees are eligible for sick leave and emergency FMLA, meaning the 30-day employment period, part-time, full-time? I will just quickly address that 30-day employment period. I don't know, we talked about that. In the past, FMLA was only available for somebody who had been with the business at least 12 months total. And the new version or the new changes to the law, it's available for any employee who's been with your company for at least 30 days. So significantly different application or eligibility now.
And sick leave is immediate. So they could work with you for 5 minutes and they're covered. So just know that.
Exactly.
If a business files for Chapter 7 to try to help keep their employees working, how would that work with this or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't do bankruptcy, and I'm just going to get myself in trouble if I try to answer that one. I'm so sorry.
No.
Okay, the next one, sick leave FMLA required if the employee has self-diagnosed or requested time off. No professional medical input is needed. Unfortunately, that is my understanding. One of the specific reasons for giving somebody emergency paid sick leave, the number 3 reason on the list is that they are experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. And that doesn't say that they need a medical certificate proving or confirming that they have these symptoms. I think it is an honor system. It's to be expected that the employer and the business will work together to figure out when somebody needs it, and that it will, I think, be best for the business owners to side with the employees. If they feel like they're sick, don't have them come into work, start the paid sick leave for them.
And you shouldn't have them come into work because
Exactly.
that puts everybody else at risk, and just document. And you can do that through an email and then save all the documentation. So if you are audited, you can prove you did it because they said they were sick. So you
And I'm going to take Tammy's question real quick too. Tammy, thanks for chiming in here. We generally require employees on leave to use their PTO while they're on leave. What is the guidance around requiring PTO to be used either during either of these paid leave benefits? I don't know, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that it's required that they have to use PTO, but employees are able to use their PTO if they want to. So the first 2 weeks of FMLA leave, if they've got banked vacation or sick leave that they haven't used yet, they can absolutely use that. And the business can continue, I would think the business can continue to enforce its internal policy that if you're taking time off and you have accrued but unused leave that's paid, you can require them to use that. I don't see any problems with doing so, even under this new law.
I don't either. So the new law is just additional leave, right? So if they've got leave accrued, this is additional for them.
Exactly. So we're almost to the end of the list, but we've got less than 2 minutes left. Anna, what do you say? What do you think we should do here?
Let's do a couple more questions. Oh, we've got 1 minute. We've got 1 minute.
So Rich asked if an employee has some accrued paid time off, do they use that if they cannot work under the COVID guidelines? Again, yes, if they got the time off, let them use it. If you've got a policy, they need to use it, continue to enforce that policy.
Okay, I'll take this one. I'm a dentist with 3 employees. I furloughed my assistant and hygienist until further notice, only seeing emergency patients now. Starting April 2nd, do I need to pay those furloughed employees for staying home while I am not working? Absolutely not. The key is, are your employees scheduled to work? If they are not scheduled to work, they do not qualify under the paid leave.
Yeah, it's got to be that the employee cannot work in person or remotely. If they're able to work and you just not let them have a job because business is slow, none of these benefits apply.
If you reopen dentists,
Yep.
then they apply.
There you go. Okay, second to last question. We're doing great. If an employee claims to be staying home because they are sick with COVID-19, would the employer be justified in requiring a doctor's note verifying that they're sick? I don't think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I think asking for a medical note if they have one or to get a medical note is fine. But again, if they're unable to produce a note, but they say they're home or they've got a scratchy throat and they're having trouble breathing, don't have them come in. It's risky for everybody, including your business.
All right, so we'll finish up this one. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying is that if one of our employees decides they want to stay home for a couple of weeks, they have to give us a reason. So the reason is what's important here, you guys. It has to be a qualified reason under these leave, the emergency FMLA and sick leave. So if it's not one of those reasons, then it falls under your policies.
Awesome. Awesome. This has been so fantastic. I'm so glad so many of you were able to join us. Again, we're going to be doing this on Friday. Dana will get that put together. Thank you, Dana, for that. And I think this has been fantastic.
Yep. Thank you all. We'll send you a follow-up email and see if you have more questions. Let us know. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks,
We're
everybody.
signing off till Friday.